In the very beginning, God has placed you in a universe ruled by rules that enable you to know what's going to happen, how things are going to work, because they apply to everyone and everything. And then God has planted in you a sense of justice, a sense of what right needs to look like. So then when you gather in communities, you can create rules together that enable there to be justice and fairness and freedom for everyone. And that is crucial to how God is making it all right. Yet, you say, oh, that's great. Thanks for the lecture about rules, Kennedy, but what the heck does that have to do with the kids drowning in Texas? It has everything to do with that. Because the psalm goes on to offer a very haunting prayer. It says, but who can detect one's own errors? Clear me from hidden faults. You see, when it comes to that flood in Texas, because we live in a universe ruled by rules, a universe of order and norms, many people knew exactly what could and likely would happen when such heavy rains hit the Guadalupe River. In fact, they had seen it happen before. Floods much like the one that swept those children away. And the owner of that camp where it happened, Camp Mystic, Dick Eastland, knew that too. He had actually led the county where Camp Mystic is to create a warning system so that when the water rose in the Guadalupe River, sirens would sound that would alert people to get to higher ground before the flood came. But that system had worn out and no longer worked. And as someone mentioned this morning, that the county, for a variety of reasons, including money and other things, had decided not to replace it. Now, Dick Eastland knew all of those things, and he also knew that these cabins were located in the place where all the maps showed the flood would hit. The place of greatest danger in the entire camp. And yet, a few years before, when the camp expanded and built new cabins, the leaders of Camp Mystic had chosen not to move those cabins out of danger. But keep them there, which ironically was, he got an exception to the rules, because if he'd built those cabins today, if they'd been brand new, he couldn't have done that. But they did. Now, does that make Dick Eastland a bad man? No, not at all. By all accounts, Dick Eastland was an extraordinarily good man. I mean, he had worked to create the warning system to begin with. He had led that camp to create a culture of love and acceptance that had blessed and touched the lives of girls and young women in ways that resonated for nearly a century. On the night of that flood, Dick Eastland gave his life trying to save those kids. And yet he also placed the youngest children in his camp in the place of the greatest danger. And that was wrong. And that was unjust, and that was unfair. Does that make Dick Eastland bad? No, it makes Dick Eastland human. See, this past week, I was driving home from church, and Patrick was in the back seat because he's been going to camp here these past weeks. And I decided that this was a perfect time to read the news on my phone. So I was driving in one hand, reading an article in the other. And Patrick called out from the back seat, "Dad, put the phone down! That's dangerous, that's risky." And me, being the caring, compassionate, conscientious father that I am, ignored him. But he was right. I was putting him and me in danger. I was taking a huge risk. And I was breaking the law. Rules. And yet in those moments, until I began working this sermon, I was blind to that very thing. See, the Bible tells us something hard. It says the world is often wrong because we've gone wrong. In fact, it wraps this up in the very beginning of all that. It's the whole story of the Garden of Eden. That somehow the wrongness in us has in some way opened up that wrongness for the world. And yet, we can be blind to seeing that. Blind to our own faults, our own frailties, our own mistakes. It reminds me of an old song by the band Dire Straits. There's a line in one of their songs that said, when you point your finger at someone, you got 3 more fingers pointing back at you. And yet all the time we're doing that to God. God, what are you doing? And God's going, "Oh, I told you about the flood. I gave you a world of rules and order, universe, and what more do you want me to do?" And so often, when the world has gone wrong, that wrongness often begins in you, in me, in us. And often the entire world suffers as a result. So, okay, but what is God doing about that? If there's wrongness in you and in me, how is God changing that?